Hey y'all, welcome back to Shootin' the Breeze. I'm your host, Michaela, and as promised, this is the place where we're going to kick back and chat about the big topics that matter and the one that make folks feel uncomfortable. Today, we're diving into a subject that's been all over the news, the increasing push to ban books in public schools. This topic hits close to home for me, not just as a mom with 4 children in school, but as someone who believes deeply in the power of education, storytelling, and exposing ourselves to different perspectives. Later in the episode, I'm going to give a review of a book I read this year called The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It's a young adult novel that's been both celebrated and challenged in school libraries across the country. But first, let's get into talking about why censorship can be a problem and where I think we need to find some balance. Grab your sweet tea, kick back, and get ready for the first episode with content. All right, guys, so let's dive in. First and foremost, I am going to call this banning books, although I don't particularly agree with that terminology. I do believe that this is a form of censorship, but these books have not been banned. All the books that are on quote-unquote banned book list right now in the United States are still available for purchase at any major retail store or bookstore, online, through Amazon, and you can also go to your local public library and check them out. So I do not think that these are banned books, rather that this is a form of censorship. The question is it appropriate? Is the censorship appropriate? Now, I consider myself to be a conservative voter. I fall more on the right side of the aisle when I am voting. So this opinion, I believe, is a little bit contrary to what most people would think a conservative woman would say. Let's dive in. So censorship might sound harmless on the surface. Who doesn't want to protect our kids from difficult or uncomfortable topics, even dangerous topics, right? But let's be real. Shielding students from certain books, I do not believe that that is about their protection. Unfortunately, we're at a place in our society where it's actually to protect educators so that educators don't fall under fire from parents who have had their feelings hurt. When we start pulling books off of shelves because they make us uncomfortable, we send a very dangerous message, and we're sending that message to our kids. What we're saying is that it's better to avoid tough conversations than to engage with them. We are robbing kids of the chance to grapple with complex ideas, to ask questions, and to develop empathy for people whose lives and experiences look different from their own. But I want to say this loud and clear. There is a difference between tackling tough topics, including sexually explicit content in schools, especially for elementary and middle school students. As a mom, I'm not okay with sexually explicit material in books for young kids, period. Elementary and middle school libraries should be safe, age-appropriate spaces. And I think most parents would agree on that. But the problem is, too often the term inappropriate is stretched to include anything that might be uncomfortable, controversial, or challenge a child's worldview. That is where things get tricky. When books address real-life issues like racism, classism, sexism, poverty, family struggles, they are not inherently inappropriate just because they make us uncomfortable. These topics can and should be approached in ways that are age-appropriate and thoughtful. It is the job of educators and parents together to guide those conversations, not shut them down altogether. So let's set some boundaries where they're needed, but let's also be careful not to overreach. If we start labeling every tough topic as off limits, we are doing a grave disservice to our kids and their ability to learn, grow, and think critically. So I want to go into a book that I read earlier this year. I had never heard of this book before. I just picked it up. It was on somebody's shelf. I was substitute teaching, and it was on the teacher's shelf. So I just grabbed it, and I started reading it. The book is called The Hate U Give. If you're not familiar, it's a young adult novel by Angie Thomas. It follows Star Carter, a black teenager who lives in a predominantly black working class neighborhood, but attends a mostly white private school. Star witnessed the fatal police shooting of her best friend Khalil in the early part of the story. So the rest of the story follows her journey as she is struggling to deal with grief, her own identity, activism, whether or not she should be an activist or be quiet. She really lives in these two different worlds, and she struggles on how to balance her life. This book made me think and feel in ways that I really did not expect. Thomas does not sugarcoat anything. She dives headfirst into issues like systemic racism, police brutality, and code switching. What struck me most, though, was Star's internal struggle. She's constantly balancing two worlds and trying to figure out who she really is and how she can use her voice. And something about that was so pertinent to me. I thought this is something that maybe not on that level, but this is something that every child or every kid coming of age goes through. They have to figure out who they are and what they stand for. And as a young person reading that book, I think it would be very easy to see yourself in Star or to identify with her struggles and see how she overcame her struggles. I'll say last year, my 9th grader was in his English class, he was reading Pride and Prejudice. And he hated it. I'll say that. He did not like reading it. And I scratched my head a lot thinking, what in the world is this 14-year-old boy going to relate to about women trying to find husbands in the 19th century? You know, where is the relation? And there was none. So it came to be that he was bored with the book. He didn't enjoy the book. I don't even know if he was really reading the book, or if he was not understanding it. And it drove him away from classical literature. He has no desire to read classical literature. So when we take these books off the shelves and we kind of handicap teachers into only being able to teach classics, we're taking things that are timely and pertinent and might actually encourage children to pick up more books, or young adults to pick up more books. And y'all, I don't know if you have talked to a high schooler lately, but my Lord, they need to pick up more books and they need to be critically thinking. This is a skill that is just dying away quickly. So I thought that this book was it was incredible because it was relatable. Even if you're not a black teenager living and going to a white private school, there was something universal about the character and her struggle. So here's the big kicker for me. The Hate U Give has been one of the most frequently challenged books in recent years. Critics say it is anti-police and too mature for students. And I'm going to give my own personal thing here. If you have read this book, you know that Star feels like she literally has a foot in both worlds, not just, my black middle-class neighborhood and my white private school. Her uncle, her mom's brother, serves as a police officer on the force responsible for killing her best friend. So she feels loyalty to the police as well and has always known her uncle to be a good person. So I would challenge that criticism of the book and say the book is not anti-police at all. It is about a struggle, and it is about knowing that just because you live under a label or just because you are identified with a certain group doesn't mean that you embrace or embody all of the stereotypes associated with that group. And then additionally, it was titled Too Mature. But here's the thing. The book isn't written for elementary or middle schoolers. It's a young adult novel for high school students, and it's absolutely, in my opinion, appropriate and necessary. If we remove books like this from school libraries just because they tackle tough topics, we are robbing older students of the opportunity to confront real world issues in a safe and guided environment. So here's my take. Instead of banning books like The Hate U Give, let's embrace them, but with intentionality. Let's ensure that books are matched to the age-appropriate groups, and let's use them as tools to start conversations, not shut them down. If you're a parent, please read these books with your kids. Read the books before your kids read them. Talk about the themes in your home, the struggles, the lessons. If you're an educator, fight to keep these stories in your classroom, but also respect the boundaries of age appropriateness. I will say, being around educators pretty much day in and day out, I have not found a single one who has time to stray from the curriculum that they're mandated to teach, at least in my district, enough to start indoctrinating students. And I really hate to even use that word, but the claims that this is happening on a wide scale is really shocking to me. And the claims that's happening on a wide scale, I think, could be very easily averted if parents would go into the schools and see what's going on. Are there educators who do this? Yes, undoubtedly. Are there educators who don't do this? More times than not. I do think that it is the job of especially high school teachers to put hard topics, open-ended hard topics, in front of our students. I will say one of my best teachers that I can remember was my government teacher in high school. I think it was my senior year, and I learned government from her, and I never ever knew what side of the aisle she was on. To this day, I'm not exactly sure. I still keep up with her. But that is the making of a well-rounded person. You should not be indoctrinating your students. And if you are, look in the mirror and try to stop. But I don't think that that is happening as much as folks claim it is. But teachers should be putting tough topics in front of students and challenging them to think differently and look at problems from a different perspective. This teacher, she would put literal questions that we're having debate. I was in high school in the 2000s, the early 2000s, and one of the big questions at that time is universal health care. And she would just open the debate, and if we all came to the same consensus, she would even play devil's advocate. Even if that's not what she agreed with, she just tried to get us to expand our thinking. And when I think about teachers like that, I just can't thank them enough. So what else can we do? If you are on a school board or if you're part of your local PTA, please remember this. Your job is not to dictate what's appropriate for every family. It is to ensure that students have access to diverse ideas and experiences while keeping age appropriateness in mind. Because once they leave high school, life comes very quick. You know, college professors don't say, well, you weren't exposed to this, so we're going to ease you into it. No, as soon as you get into college, if that's where you're going, you're going to learn about it real quick. And I just think that if we take a step back and have some common sense solutions, right? We've read the books, or there's synopsises of the books sent home with the children so that the parents can know what the book is about. There's all kinds of websites out there. Even for my fifth grader this year, we got a list of novel study, possible novels that they would study, and we went through, and I researched every single one of them. I hadn't read all the books, but I wanted to know, what might be appropriate for my 11-year-old, what might not be appropriate for my 11-year-old. So there is a way to be involved and not overtake the education system by just imposing a set of morals that might not be what you think it is. So I highly encourage parents to read these books, to get involved with your children's education, and don't jump to conclusions on what a book might be. Definitely give your kids the chance and the space to be able to learn for themselves. All right, y'all, that's it for today. I hope this episode gave you something to think about and maybe inspired you to pick up the book, The Hate You Give, if you haven't already. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about book censorship? Are there any books you've read recently that challenged you in a good way? Let me know at Shootin' the Breeze podcast on Instagram or shootinthebreeze247@gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, don't be afraid to shoot the breeze, especially when it comes to the tough stuff.